Beloved ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Animefied. Today, let us look into anime called The Saint's magic power is omnipotent. So, let's begin. Katori Yusei is a 20-year-old office worker who is a bit of a workaholic. One night, when she returns home after working overtime, she is suddenly masked in light and summoned as a saint to a royal palace in another world. However, the prince who appears is absorbed in another girl who has also been summoned, and the neglected Sei has more time than she knows what to do with. At that time, Jude, a young man Sei met on the grounds of the royal palace, showed her around the Institute of Medicinal Plants. Sei, who already had a thing for plants and was interested in research institutes, worked as a researcher there but will demonstrate unexpected abilities in making potions using medicinal herbs and magic. She picks it up the technique very quickly and even produces more than the academy can handle. She had requested for some portion when the Third Order of Knights returned from an expedition wounded by a fire-breathing lizard known as a salamander. Sei and her friends begin healing the knights. The biggest miracle Sei showcased was saving the commander of the Third Order of Knights with her potions. Johan is grateful but also reports to his superior that she might be the saint after all. With additional funding from the castle, Johan can provide a kitchen. When Sei makes some food, the staff takes a liking to the food she's able to make, especially since it uses medicinal herbs. She officially meets Albert Hawk, who offers to take her along with some others into the southern woods to get ingredients for top-class potions. As Sei begins to work without glasses, the rest of the staff falls in love with Sei's cooking. Sei goes to the palace library where she meets Elizabeth Ashley. Albert begins escorting her back so they make regular trips together. During one of those trips, Elizabeth asks for a favor for her friend, Nicole Adler. Sei happily provides lotion for Nicole's acne, and she's grateful. News of these cosmetics spread throughout the country. Elizabeth then teases Sei about her budding romance with Albert, dubbed the Ice Knight. Sei gets some cold water for her feet to soak in to ward off the heat. Jude helps her make it cold but reminds her that no one is to see her bare feet. Jude also tells her that there are barely any ice mages in the kingdom. Albert accidentally sees Sei's feet when he comes to visit her. After apologizing, he asks her to come into town with him the following day. They ride into town in a carriage. Albert helps Sei get down the carriage and holds her hand as they begin looking around the marketplace. As Sei notices Albert is constantly holding her hand, they pass by some shops with Sei interested in a hair ornament. Sadly, it's out of her budget, so Albert gives it to her as a gift after their time in the marketplace. Some gems in it match Albert's eyes. The day after, Johan asks Sei how their date went. Sei then realizes that she went on a date with Albert the previous day. It turned out, according to Johan, that Albert wouldn't just ask any woman to join him on a trip to the marketplace. A few weeks later, Albert calls her back in for help enchanting. Apparently, the First Order of Knights heard of Sei's enchantments and wanted their own. The assembly couldn't supply them, so Sei would have to go in and make them for the knights. Sei is happy to help, but Johan makes it clear that she is to be compensated afterward. Sei sees the assembly drained, and it's only because an expedition is happening soon, so they need to make the enchantments quickly. By the day's end, she fulfilled many enchanting requirements, hoping to finish by the following day. Albert appraises them and is impressed by Sei's brilliant work. The rest of the assembly makes a big deal on how the head mage never smiled before. As for compensation, Sei requests to see a craftsman. She sees Albert and brings him some sweets along with a pendant that has a foci with her eye color enchanted to protect against magical damage. Albert kisses Sei's hand and she goes black after that. King Siegfried Slantania takes note of Sei's achievements via her enchantments. The head mage, Albert, suggests that Sei is the saint. However, they can't confirm until the Grand Magus awakens. Sei meanwhile makes delivery of potions to the Third Order of Knights. They mention how the First and Second Order of Knights will be heading into the forest together in a month, and how the First Order of Knights is taking things easy with their prince and saint, Era Misono. After the talk, Sei believes that she could be the saint but refuses to tell anyone quite yet, as she doesn't want that conclusion to be true. Sei gets kicked out of the lab again for making too many potions. She goes to learn more kinds of magic and more powerful herbs at the library. When Sei gets there, she remembers that such tomes are usually in the Forbidden Collection. She finds a book on holy affinity magic, but the spells are too advanced for her. The king himself arrives and gives her a book for basic healing. Sei slowly puts together that he's the king and denies any reward she's offered. The king has to leave but assures her that she'll be rewarded properly. After the joint expedition is over, Sei notes several soldiers who are severely wounded or missing limbs. One of them even talks about retiring because he can't go back to work. Sei works her magic on him and everyone else. To finish it up, she heals several people at once with an area heal spell. Johan and Albert are impressed with Sei's work. Later on, Sei is given notice that she is to be appraised by the Grand Magi Assembly. Sei is taken to Yuri Druz, the Grand Magus, who's finally awakened. Accompanied by Johan, she meets him and is officially introduced to his second-in-command, Albert Hawk. Yuri tries to appraise her but is unable to do so. He does notice the golden hue that her magic gives off when she performs a healing spell. Yuri believes it's either her otherworldly nature or something else. this. Sei has a good idea what it means though. Yuri speaks with the king privately, and while he cannot prove it, Yuri is convinced that Sei is the saint. He also mentions Era's potential as well because of her magical powers improve at a rapid rate. The king concludes that the prince's behavior cannot be overlooked anymore. He orders that Sei be invited to court for a formal apology. Sei is surprised by the invite and says that she hasn't anything formal to wear in court. After thinking it over, she accepts and is taken to the castle for preparation. The head of the maids, Marie, welcomes her and helps her out. Sei barely recognizes herself, and it's clear that those in court see her as a saint. Albert Hawk escorts her to the throne room. At court, the king formally apologizes to Sei for his son's behavior. Sei accepts the apology and asks to see the forbidden section and a tutor for magic as recompense. The king agrees, and Sei later finds out that Yuri is to be her magic teacher. Meanwhile, Kyle hears the news but says everything is okay with the real saint. Yuri Drews makes his intentions clear on training Sei. He wants to study her magic by observing her. Albert is appalled but decides to go with it. The training with him is difficult, but it's clear she's lucky compared to the other people Yuri has trained. She visits Albert to tell him that she'll be taking her magic lessons during his drills. Albert agrees and wishes for Sei not to push herself during her training with Yuri. Albert announces Sei joining the training as a healer, and she falls asleep that night very happily. Yuri notes her progress and reveals his desire to study Sei's magic. 1 week later, Sei is invited for tea with a noble. Marie decides to call it a test of sorts for everything Sei has learned in her lady lessons. This noble turns out to be Elizabeth Ashley. She hoped to see Sei again after she hadn't been in the library for a while. During this time, it's noted that Elizabeth knows that Sei is the saint. She also talks about the other girl who was summoned and attended the Royal Magic Academy. Apparently, Era had been getting a lot of attention that had been causing problems. However, this is not Era's fault, since she's unaware of this world's ridiculous class system. Sei explains that in Japan, more specifically the 21st century, is more socially relaxed, indirectly stating that women are allowed to have their legs exposed and interact with other men, since there's no nobility, and arranged marriages. One of Era's admirers was Prince Kyle, who happened to be Elizabeth's fiancé. She tries to apologize to Sei on her future husband's behalf, but Sei says it's no big deal. They continue their tea time with Sei asking what life at the Royal Magic Academy is like. In a flashback, Era is about to leave her house after texting her mother when she's whisked away to another world. She's given the lowdown about Slantania's situation by Kyle's attendant, Damien, and realizes she'll never be able to return home. After crying herself to sleep, Kyle vows to keep her safe. A few days later, Era tours the marketplace with Kyle and a few of his attendants. She notices how uptight everyone is about the prince. He explains how social norms are awkward, but he vows to change them, and Era offers to help. She's given a mage's uniform and takes on classes with the prince and his friends. Meanwhile, the other ladies look on in disgust. A few of them even confront Era about it, but they're chased off by Kyle. Meanwhile, Kyle learns that Sei may be the saint they've been looking for and gets frustrated. He decides to remain on course though. The next morning, Elizabeth tries talking with Era but is denied by Kyle. The attendant then asks Elizabeth about the saint, and Elizabeth remarks that she's friends with the saint. Era goes to bed hoping to talk with Elizabeth properly the next time they meet. Back at the institute, Sei tries imbuing water itself with magic, but to no avail. Sei remembers holy water was a thing in video games in her world, so she asks Yuri about blessings. While Yuri hasn't heard of the concept, he finds it fascinating. He then mentions a spell known as the Saintly Conjury, a spell that has barely any information on how it's cast. It does purify miasma and destroys monsters born of it. Sei thinks of it as a dead end and continues to try and bless plants. This continues late into the night, and Sei does find out that plants respond to holy magic. The herbs are used to make Sei's effective potions that can be made by anyone. Johan apologizes and mentions that she's been called into the woods to help with the next expedition. Sei is slightly melancholic but agrees to go. Jude and Johan see her off as Albert goes to accompany her. Yuri also tags along, hoping to get more info on Sei's saintly conjury. As the Night Order makes camp, Albert comes clean about the enchantment and that he's happy that she's wearing it. The expedition goes smoothly for the most part, but things pick up as the miasma grows denser. The Night Order finds a pack of wolves and a salamander protecting the miasma swamp. The attack goes south and Albert is badly hurt. Sei tries to help him and activates her saintly conjury, purifying the area. Everyone is either happy or relieved that the expedition was a success. Yuri gets elated from Sei's spell earlier that day. He begins asking her all sorts of questions, so Albert gets him to back off. Albert expresses his thanks to Sei as well. News of her exploits gets around and everyone looks at her with reverence. Johan ends up apologizing, hoping to make her life easier going forward. After one magic lesson, Sei overhears Prince Kyle arguing with Elizabeth about Era. Sei accidentally gets involved and Albert jumps to her defense. The king shows up to pull his son out of his disillusions. They move their conversation to a private room to Sei's relief. Prince Kyle is sentenced to house arrest with his associates while Era continues to live as she wishes. Elizabeth sees through Kyle's plan to make himself a martyr, but Kyle denies it. He does ask for Elizabeth to take care of Era, to which she agrees. Era eventually makes friends with both Sei and Elizabeth. Siegfried then hears about how the countryside is still ravaged by monsters and that Kloster's domain is the most desperate for the saints' help. Later, Sei is asked to accompany the Third Order of Knights to Kloster's domain in 2 weeks. She accepts, much to Albert and Johan's surprise. She notes that the two of them put up with a lot to make her happy and silently thanks them for all they've done. Sei and Albert arrive in Kloster's domain and are met by the Lord himself. Sei relaxes from her journey in her casual garb provided by Marie. She thinks about how Kloster's domain is the alchemist's holy land and hopes to learn of potions stronger than high grade. Sei is impressed by the meal at dinner and notes that Kloster adopted her cooking methods. Kloster also wants Sei to meet his esteemed herbalist, which Sei agrees. After dinner, Albert notes that he'll be taking a few days to survey the kingdom before they head on their expedition. The following day, Sei meets Corona and she's delighted to meet the saint. Sei helps learn to make potions and even meets a mercenary named Leonhardt. The next day, she's allowed to look through the diary of the great alchemist. Through this, Sei learns that the great alchemist was a saint whose prayers for her little brother brought life back to the fields of Kloster's domain. The mercenary group returns to have many injured warriors. They're happy for Sei's potions, but Sei gets worried for Albert. After healing the mercenaries, she finds Commander Hawk collapsed surrounded by his men. Sei thinks the worst and her blessing activates. Albert was revealed to be fine, but Sei realizes something. The saint's true magic is that of love. Back in Kloster's domain, Sei practices with Saint's conjury. She gets it to work, but she gets embarrassed. Marie comes in with some afternoon tea. Sei notes how good Marie is with her job, and she appreciates it since she doesn't think about it too much. Sei takes Marie's words to heart. When Sei goes to work, she asks Corona for help with her blessing. Corona has a servant set up several potted plants that haven't sprouted. Sei manages to perform the blessing but notes it'll take a bit to see if it worked. Corona then asks her to bless several more potted plants and agrees they should check on them the following day. Leonhardt then comes by asking Sei to join his mercenary company. Corona mocks his rude behavior and Albert is also cross with him. Leonhardt realizes that Sei is the saint and is kicked in the shins for his reckless request. Albert decides to discuss with Sei about their recent expeditions, and Corona pulls Leonhardt's ear so the pair can have some alone time. Albert sympathetically asks Sei for help since she's the only healer around. She agrees but thinks about her preparations to cast the blessing, which gets Albert to ask if she's okay. She doesn't say anything to him yet. Back in the research lab, Johan has tea with Jude. They talk about what Sei is likely up to. Sei talks with Leonhardt about the formality around her and about the expedition coming up. Later on, the expedition is ready to begin after Albert talks with the troops. He asks if Sei could speak with them to help him out, but she refuses. She gets into the carriage with Albert giving her a longing look. After a trek into the woods, Sei gets out of the carriage to stretch. She's hopeful to look at the herbs in Kloster's domain. Leonhardt says his greetings to Albert and Sei formally, while Sei reminds him that it's okay for him to speak normally to them. As the knights travel through the woods, a slime creeps nearby. Meanwhile, Leonhardt learns that Sei primarily works in the research institute while her saint duties are a side job to her. After an awkward moment, Sei remarks on how beautiful the forest is. Leonhardt mentions that it's only a forest, but he spent a lot of time in them. Sei mentions her forests aren't like those here and it was nice. Their nice moment is cut off when the knights note that they found something, some slime digestive juice at the base of a tree. They note the lack of monsters other than the slime and it's likely due to Sei being there. They continue forward with caution as the slime trails them. After a while, some more come up and surrounded the expedition. The party begins fighting them off but are quickly outnumbered. Eventually, Yuri comes in with several fire tornadoes to kill off a bunch along with Era and several mages. Sei successfully purifies the miasma swamp in the forest, learning how to best use her powers and even finding a few new uses for them, such as regrowing the entire woodland. Not only was it burned down in the first place because she got distracted from casting her spell, but Yuri had to step in and set fire to the whole forest. but it also feels like a natural progression from what Sei already knew she could do: heal people, regrow limbs, and enhance herbs. All these things could easily apply to plant life in the woods. Sei and the rest of the expedition team that was ambushed by the slime were able to retreat because of the reinforcement led by Yuri and Era. Later, Sei asks for Korina's help so she can train to use the saint's magic freely. The reorganized expedition team once again heads into the woods, but Leonhardt, who loved the forest where he grew up, is concerned because they are accompanied by Yuri, who was once known for raiding an entire area during an expedition. The pair return to the kingdom with Yuri and his mages at the end. Sei tells Albert what the secret of the saint's power is. So, this is it for today. Make sure to subscribe this channel and I will see you in the next video. Peace.